In the grand theater of American politics, few women shone as brightly or defiantly as Alice Roosevelt Longworth. Born in 1884 to Theodore Roosevelt, she inherited not just his name, but his indomitable spirit, a force of nature that would shape a nation. From her earliest days, Alice seemed destined to break the mold, shattering expectations and rewriting the rules of what it meant to be a woman in the public eye. Dubbed Princess Alice by a press that obsessed over her every move, she became the nation's first true political celebrity. Cigarette in hand, unchaperoned in cars with men, gambling, laughing, and dazzling every room she entered, she confounded expectations. Her father, exasperated by her antics, once declared, "I can be President of the United States, or I can attend to Alice. I cannot possibly do both." But behind the dazzling facade lay a deeply human story, one of love, loss, and the unrelenting quest for identity. Orphaned by her mother's death just days after birth and left adrift by a grieving father, Alice learned the hard way that the world could be a cold and unforgiving place. Her rebellious spirit, often mistaken for mere attention-seeking, was in truth a armor forged from the pain of abandonment and the desperate desire to be seen, heard, and loved for who she truly was. In a life that spanned nearly a century, Alice would rise from the ashes of tragedy to become a true icon, a woman who refused to be defined by the men around her or the society that sought to constrain her. Through scandals and triumphs, heartbreaks and victories, she would carve her own path, leaving an indelible mark on the nation she loved. Join us as we delve into the scandals, triumphs, heartbreaks, and legacy of the indomitable Alice Roosevelt Longworth, an American original, elegant, and untamed to the very end. Alice Lee Roosevelt was born into a world of both privilege and tragedy on February 12, 1884. Just 2 days after her birth, on Valentine's Day, heartbreak struck the Roosevelt family. Alice's mother, Alice Hathaway Lee Roosevelt, succumbed to nephritis, while her paternal grandmother, Martha Bullock Roosevelt, fell victim to typhoid fever. Shattered by grief, Theodore Roosevelt withdrew emotionally, unable to even utter his daughter's name. Baby Alice was left in the caring hands of her aunt, Anna Bai Roosevelt, who stepped in as her first maternal figure. For the first 3 years of her life, Alice grew up without her father's presence. It wasn't until 1887 that she rejoined his household, not by his own choice, but at the insistence of his second wife, Edith Kermit Caro. Edith, pregnant with their first child together, firmly believed that Alice should live with them. Theodore and Edith, childhood friends who had once ended a romance, likely due to concerns about Edith's father's alcoholism, had rekindled their love and married in December 1886. After their honeymoon, they welcomed Alice into their home, though Edith quickly sent her to spend the summer with her maternal grandparents in Boston. There, in the embrace of Chestnut Hill, Alice found herself cherished. She played with her late mother's dolls, mingled with the esteemed Boston Brahmins, and was reminded of her dual elite heritage, the Roosevelts on her father's side and the Lees, Cabots, and Lowells on her mother's. The Lees, steadfast in their support, preserved Alice's inheritance and even discreetly supported the Roosevelt household. Edith, known for her cool and reserved demeanor, kept contact with Aunt Bai limited to matters of clothing and heirlooms. When Alice returned to Sagamore Hill in late 1887, she entered a home filled with tension. Edith, pregnant once more and emotionally fragile from a previous miscarriage, remained distant. Theodore, still haunted by the loss of his first wife, was emotionally inaccessible. In this atmosphere, 4-year-old Alice found herself lonely and desperate for affection. The birth of Theodore Jr. in September only heightened her sense of isolation, as Edith banned Aunt Bai entirely, severing Alice's connection to her past. Alone and afraid of further loss, Alice clung fiercely to her baby brother, her protectiveness born from the depths of her own grief. Just before the explosion of the USS Maine, 14-year-old Alice found herself once again under the nurturing care of Aunt Bai. With Edith still recovering and TR consumed by the impending war, Bai stepped in to provide stability to the Roosevelt household. Under her warm yet structured guidance, daily baths, music practice, and household chores, Alice blossomed into a more refined, emotionally grounded, and self-assured young woman. TR, in his letters, praised Bai for Alice's remarkable transformation, acknowledging her wit and charm. Even Edith, though often critical, couldn't help but recognize Alice's appeal, albeit with a hint of suspicion that Cousin Helen might be aiding her in crafting such clever correspondence. As TR joined the ranks of the Rough Riders in April 1898, Edith remained unwell, prompting Ted Jr. to move in with Bai and Alice. Amidst this, Bai, at the age of 43, discovered she was expecting a child. Their home became a hub of liveliness and chaos, filled with anticipation and patriotic fervor. That summer, Alice secretly taught herself to ride astride using her father's saddle, already pushing boundaries at the tender age of 14. When they visited the Rough Riders, she playfully remarked, "If I was in love with one Rough Rider, I was in love with 20. TR's wartime heroism propelled him to the New York governorship, and Alice eagerly assisted in managing the campaign mail, joining in the family's celebrations. Standing beside Edith at his swearing-in, Alice savored a rare moment of peace in their home. TR showered her with praise for her beauty and intellect, while Edith wrote of their unparalleled happiness. When TR accepted the vice presidential nomination in 1900, Edith disapproved, but Alice was thrilled at the prospect of returning to Washington. Supporters gifted her a stern-faced toy bear, which she affectionately named Jonathan Edwards. Despite sharing her father's frustrations with the role, Alice embraced the excitement it brought. At the 1901 inauguration, Alice donned a white gown chosen by Edith but felt underdressed. Accidentally sitting in First Lady Ida McKinley's chair, she found herself more drawn to the lively dancing than the formal ceremony. That summer, her carefree days at Sagamore Hill were filled with picnics, swimming, and even learning the scandalous hoochie coochie dance. However, her joy was cut short by recurring jaw pain and the shocking news of President McKinley's assassination. When McKinley passed away on September 14th, TR ascended to the presidency. At 16, Alice masked her excitement publicly, but privately traced every detail of her father's journey to Buffalo, even requesting a souvenir horseshoe from his mount. She later joked that TR's rise was sheer rapture, but also understood that her life had irrevocably changed. With composure, she accepted the end of her childhood and stepped into her public role. On February 23, 1902, Alice made her diplomatic debut by christening Kaiser Wilhelm II's yacht, Meteor. Despite her nervousness, she had practiced bottle smashing in Aunt Bai's yard, ensuring the event's success. That summer, the Alice Roosevelt Waltz debuted, and her love life became fodder for the press. She joked about being falsely reported engaged 5 times in just 8 months. Her parents, growing increasingly uneasy, urged her to focus on purpose, but Alice's heart was set on Newport. There, she mingled with the elite, gambled at bridge, attended yacht races, and scandalized society by driving unchaperoned to Boston with Lila Paul in a red automobile, an incident that sparked her lifelong passion for cars. By 1904, she had purchased a $2,500 touring car, affectionately dubbed the Red Devil, becoming a pioneering female driver. In 1907, Motor Magazine credited her with helping to normalize women behind the wheel. In 1903, Alice formed a notorious trio with Countess Maggie Cassini and heiress Cissy Patterson, known as the Three Graces. They smoked, gambled, danced provocatively, and defied curfews, fueling Alice's wildest instincts. A British column, reprinted in the New York Tribune, hailed Alice as a fearless modern woman. She traveled alone, dined solo, and redefined the role of the first daughter. In one famous act of defiance, she lit a cigarette on the White House roof after TR banned indoor smoking. When a relative offered her cigars to embarrass her, she accepted and enjoyed them, becoming Washington's first public female smoker. She carried cigarettes in her compact, letting them spill provocatively in public. Though initially scandalous, Alice's public smoking helped normalize the practice for women. By 1905, Edith quipped that Sagamore Hill smokes like a daughter, and TR mocked her in cartoons. Between 1902 and 1903, Alice attended over 2,400 functions, including 407 dinners, 350 balls, and 680 teas, shaking 32,000 hands and signing countless autographs. A photo of her gambling at a racetrack was quietly suppressed by TR's allies, but Alice remained undeterred. During one frustrating meeting, TR snapped, "I can be President of the United States, or I can attend to Alice. I cannot possibly do both." Friends encouraged her to channel her fame into leadership, but Alice chose indulgence, racking up over $1,000 in debt with her friends by late 1903. Marriage, however, offered a strategic way out. From the age of 14, Alice had viewed matrimony not as romantic fulfillment, but as a path to escape surveillance and financial insecurity. Turkey forbade foreign suitors, narrowing her choices. As a member of New York's elite 400, she had access to high society's most eligible bachelors. TR disdained the nouveau riche, preferring old money, but Alice found industrialists more interesting. Alice's education and love was pieced together from duty, silence, and strategy. With no guidance on sex or emotion, she built her own code of self-protection. Her affairs were intense but calculated. One early heartbreak came from Edward Carpenter, an army officer she met in Cuba. Alice fell hard, showered him with gifts and letters, but he ultimately rejected her. Though he offered affectionate tokens, her devastation was clear. Back in Washington, she juggled suitors like Charles de Chambrun and J. Van Ness Phillips. When Van Ness proposed, she laughed. Carpenter showed up the next day to propose too. She turned him down, calling their exchange a conversation between two idiots. By summer 1902, she was infatuated with Arthur Iselin, a socially acceptable suitor. Their relationship grew emotionally intense, but he never proposed. When rumors surfaced of his interest in another woman, Alice was crushed. Over time, marriage became less about love and more about liberation, from loneliness, scrutiny, and instability. She assessed suitors not only for romance but for security, masking their names in her diary, guarding the only part of her life she could still keep to herself. At the age of 19, Alice turned her focus to Congressman Nicholas Longworth, a charming, aristocratic Ohioan whose wit, pedigree, and social fluency made him an ideal escape from her stifling home life. Though Edith warned he drank too much, TR allowed the match. Emotionally frayed and in debt, Alice was ready to accept the next suitable proposal, and Nick fit the bill. Politically savvy, socially adept, and emotionally intriguing. Their bond was more alliance than romance. Both were performers in Washington society. He, a Harvard-educated congressman raised at Cincinnati's opulent Rookwood estate. She, the nation's most famous daughter. Nick, a musical prodigy turned rakish politician, masked his indiscipline with charm. Despite his affairs, particularly a long-standing one with Miriam Little Hootie Bloomer, he navigated Alice's fame with ease, but private tensions simmered. Alice grew jealous of her close friend Maggie Cassini's flirtation with Nick. When Maggie claimed he proposed and she declined, Alice was devastated. Though she maintained appearances, their friendship ended, with Maggie's omission from Alice's autobiography marking the emotional scar. On Christmas Eve 1904, Nick returned with a declaration of love. Their renewed courtship was intense, layered with guilt, longing, and premarital intimacy, scandalous for the time. Still, Alice remained haunted by fears of infidelity. Her emotional dependence deepened just as her relationship with her parents grew more strained. During this period, her health declined. She lost weight, suffered dental and skin issues, and found solace only in Nick and Aunt Bai. After a high-profile diplomatic tour of East Asia, where the press speculated endlessly about their relationship, Alice and Nick quietly became engaged. The wedding gifts, broadcast in the press with great fanfare, thrilled Alice more than any other part of the event. From heirlooms and silver to jeweled miniatures and a $25,000 Cuban pearl necklace, her favorite, worn until death, the extravagance rivaled that of royalty. One British official remarked that not even a royal bride had received such honors. But alongside the fanfare came warnings. Friends cautioned that Nick might be more attracted to her celebrity than herself. At 36, he remained emotionally tied to his domineering mother Susan, a dynamic Alice quickly came to resent. As the wedding neared, Nick grew visibly uncomfortable in her shadow. Jokes that he would need to kowtow like a royal consort underscored the shifting power dynamic. Behind the polished facade, both were unraveling. Nick fell ill, Alice's eczema flared, and her letters revealed overwhelming anxiety and jealousy, especially about Catherine Elkins. She even confessed she'd rather see Nick dead than married to someone else. But despite her anxiety, Alice and Nick were wed in the East Room of the White House. On February 17, 1906, she wore a gown of American white satin with a silver brocade train, lace from her mother's wedding dress, and her beloved pearls. The Marine Band played the Wedding March as Bishop Satterlee presided and Washington's elite looked on. Publicly hailed as a patriotic union, privately it marked the end of Alice's independence. Though now Mrs. Longworth, she remained Princess Alice in the public imagination. The fairy tale unraveled almost immediately. On their honeymoon at the McLean's estate, Alice received an anonymous letter claiming Nick had fathered a child and married her for status. Though never proven, she saved it, signaling its emotional impact. A subsequent trip to Cuba, intended to echo her father's military legacy, was marred by Nick's drinking and erratic behavior. Though they smiled for photographers, the tension was palpable. Back in Washington, Alice gravitated back to her Roosevelt orbit for support. By 1906, Alice was a disillusioned newlywed with growing political awareness. Financial strain, her grandfather controlled her limited inheritance, and Nick's wealth was dwindling, added to the stress. Though she continued to command public attention, her marriage quickly began to crack. She played the dutiful political wife, boosting Nick's campaigns and dazzling at events like the Kentucky Derby and a massive reception in Hawaii. But behind the scenes, she withdrew, spending increasing time away from Nick at Sagamore Hill or Newport, and growing to despise his mother, Susan Longworth. As TR prepared to leave office and endorsed William Howard Taft, Alice mourned the end of an era. She was wary of Helen Taft and sensed the first cracks in what would become a political rift between the Roosevelt and Taft factions. Though still revered in public, Alice was entering a lonelier, more complicated chapter, a woman navigating the harsh reality of her choices. In 1907, a sudden appendicitis attack brought Alice back to the White House for surgery. Even during recovery, she helped shape President-elect Taft's political messaging, so intensely that she popped a stitch during his visit. Her involvement deepened as Nick received a prestigious committee post. As TR's presidency wound down, tensions mounted. Edith longed for retirement, while TR sought escape through an African safari. Alice, drifting between Washington and Cincinnati, sensed the growing rift between the Roosevelts and the Tafts. On election night 1908, she and Nick celebrated Taft's win and Nick's re-election, but Alice resented how the Taft circle downplayed TR's influence. When she received only a formal invite to Helen Taft's inaugural luncheon, she felt insulted. Calling Helen hippopotamus face, Alice mocked her openly. She walked the White House one last time with Archie Butt and, in a final act of defiance, buried a voodoo doll of Helen in the garden, earning herself a ban during the Taft administration. With TR abroad, Alice turned to books and politics. Though uninterested in policy minutiae, she aligned emotionally with the progressive insurgents, while Nick backed high tariffs in the party's conservative wing, putting them at odds. As Taft alienated reformers and TR's serialized safari accounts boosted his popularity, the GOP began to fracture. By 1910, TR was pulled back into politics, his new nationalism speech in Osawatomie laying out a progressive vision, while Democrats gained the House for the first time in 16 years, a sign of growing unrest. In 1912, TR challenged Taft for the Republican nomination. Nick sided with Taft, devastating Alice, not because of infidelity, but political betrayal. Though the marriage survived, her trust in Nick didn't. Caught between her father and husband, Alice suffered anxiety and insomnia. She became TR's advisor and strategist, while Nick stayed neutral. Their home split into rival camps, mirroring the fractured GOP. Alice publicly supported TR while quietly funding both campaigns. TR outpolled Taft, but lost to Wilson. Nick lost re-election by just 97 votes. Alice blamed herself for attending a progressive rally, believing her presence had tipped the race. In 1913, the Longworths relocated to Ohio. Alice hated Cincinnati, clashed with her in-laws, and quickly grew restless. Nick resumed legal work but remained politically obsessed. Their marriage frayed, his flirtations and her emotional depletion created distance. During this time, Alice formed a deep, non-physical bond with lawyer Joseph S. Graydon. They exchanged affectionate letters. She called him her soulmate, he called her Serafina. Their intellectual romance faltered over political differences, especially his support for Wilson. Though it faded, it awakened Alice's emotional independence. After Nick's 1914 re-election, Alice returned to Washington, energized. She transformed her parlor into a political salon and re-established herself as a discreet but influential force in national politics. Her disillusionment with Wilson sharpened during World War I, especially after the Lusitania sank. Though her influence remained unofficial, TR considered her an essential ally. Too old to serve, Nick supported arms production while carefully managing his German-American constituents. TR declared the family fully mobilized, sons enlisted, daughters served abroad, and Alice, at home, wielded power. Her home became TR's base in Washington, where strategy was shaped and Wilson criticized. When Wilson asked Congress to declare war in April 1917, Alice felt vindicated but deeply anxious. She declined a writing offer from the Washington Post, preferring to influence events behind the scenes. Her circle mobilized. Willard Straight visited her before shipping out, but later died of influenza, and General Goethals returned to duty. As war engulfed her world, Alice's political passion grew, alongside personal grief. Alice initially admired Wilson's 1918 14 Points address, but soon condemned it as dangerously idealistic. Her chief concern was the League of Nations, which she saw as a threat to U.S. sovereignty. Teaming up with Senator William Borah, a fierce opponent of the League, Alice became a prominent voice in the Republican opposition, helping shape conservative foreign policy for the next decade. As TR pushed for a war cabinet to reduce Wilson's control, Alice's home became a hub for Republican strategy, hosting press briefings, meetings, and messaging efforts. But personal tragedy struck when Quentin Roosevelt was killed in combat on July 14, 1918. Though TR maintained public stoicism, the family was devastated. Alice, reeling, briefly reconnected with Joseph Graydon for solace. On Armistice Day, she walked Cincinnati's jubilant streets alone, feeling only emptiness. That Christmas was marked by loss. Franklin Roosevelt was ill, Uncle Douglas Robinson had died, and TR, physically diminished, spent his final holiday at Sagamore Hill. Theodore Roosevelt died in his sleep on January 6, 1919. Archie's telegram, "The old lion is dead," shattered Alice. She never spoke of it publicly, omitting it from her memoirs just as TR had once done with her mother's death. Silence became her mourning. In grief, Alice threw herself into the anti-leak fight alongside Borah. Their political alliance deepened into a romantic bond, offering Alice the emotional fulfillment absent from her marriage. Borah, a former trial lawyer who once rode boxcars and told stories by campfire, embodied the rugged, principled masculinity she admired. He was austere in private life, abstinent and religious, but bold and unpredictable in politics, traits that mirrored Alice's own contradictions. They championed women's suffrage at the state level, child welfare, and civil liberties, though they clashed on federal interventions like anti-lynching legislation. Still, their intellectual and emotional bond became one of the most meaningful of Alice's life. As Nick rose within the GOP, becoming majority leader in 1923, Alice grew more rebellious and emotionally distant. Her relationship with Borah offered the intimacy and respect her marriage lacked. The tangled web grew more dramatic when Alice discovered Nick in an intimate moment with her former friend and rival, Sissy Patterson. Around the same time, rumors swirled about Borah and Sissy as well. In spring 1924, at age 40, Alice discovered she was pregnant, almost certainly with Borah's child. She chose to carry the pregnancy, partially influenced by Borah's earlier grief over a fiancé who had died from an abortion. The paternity remained a closely guarded secret. With rumors of a vice presidential bid for Borah looming, Alice quietly worked to shut it down. She missed the 1924 Republican convention, citing illness, while her brother Ted helped deflect speculation. Separated by propriety, Alice and Borah communicated through coded language. Hello meant, I love you, and messages were hidden in underlined letters in shared books and papers. Though marriage was impossible, their love was real, political, intellectual, and deeply emotional. As the 1924 election passed, Alice stood on the brink of reinvention, a mother, a political force, and the secret beloved of a man she considered her equal. On Election Day, Coolidge, Borah, and Nick all won re-election. Alice's brother Ted lost, partly due to Eleanor Roosevelt's political maneuvering. After the elections, Alice revealed her pregnancy. Edith Roosevelt, shaken, noted it in her diary. When asked publicly, Alice responded bluntly, "Hell yes. Isn't it wonderful?" The press was stunned. Insiders, aware of Nick's infertility, suspected Borah as the father. Alice gave birth on February 14, 1925, at Chicago's Drake Hotel, 2 days after her birthday and the anniversary of her mother's and grandmother's deaths. She named the baby Paulina. Ruth, Kermit, and Aunt Edith were present. Borah, informed through the press, sent a joyful, spiritually charged letter. The child bore striking resemblances to both TR and Borah. Nick visited Alice and quickly fell in love with Paulina, embracing fatherhood publicly. The press dubbed Alice the real Speaker of the House. Though many suspected the truth, no one publicly questioned the child's paternity. Borah stayed emotionally engaged, writing affectionate letters and developing new secret nicknames with Alice: PFP, Paulina's female parent, and MP, male parent. Back in Washington, Borah met Paulina. Mary Borah, surprisingly, visited too, holding the child and later carrying photos. Alice even brought Mary to Nick's speaker swearing in, a calculated public gesture that helped suppress rumor. Only trusted confidants like Ruth McCormick and possibly Ted Roosevelt knew the full story. Alice raised Paulina amid political sophistication and discretion. The truth of her parentage remained hidden until Paulina overheard it as a teenager, yet the fiction held. In a remarkable private accord, Alice, Nick, Borah, and Mary constructed a lifelong performance, protecting Paulina not just from scandal, but from the brutal glare of public truth. By 1926, Alice Roosevelt Longworth had reclaimed her influence in Washington. As wife of the Speaker and partner of the Senate's most powerful isolationist, she was no longer merely a Roosevelt daughter. She was a political force in her own right. Her daughter Paulina became a Capitol Hill darling, beloved by First Lady Grace Coolidge, who saw in her echoes of both Alice and TR. Alice remained publicly visible, appearing in the Senate gallery, contributing to cookbooks, and even turning a $5,000 cold cream endorsement into a media sensation. Her social clout was so powerful that Queen Marie of Romania prioritized meeting Alice over the First Lady. Nick, devoted to Paulina, relished fatherhood, taking her to lessons and doting on her in the halls of Congress. By 1930, the Longworths were at their zenith, hosting political salons where gossip and strategy intertwined. Alice backed Ruth Hanna McCormick's Senate run, promoting her anti-World Court stance and rallying female voters. When Nick let Ruth sit in the speaker's chair, it highlighted Alice's unseen influence. But their triumph was marred by an editorial from Alice's longtime rival, Sissy Patterson, who mocked her as an elitist relic. A second piece, Will She? Can She? Dared Alice to prove her sway by securing Borah's backing for Ruth amid a finance scandal. The challenge, rooted in romantic rivalry, thrust Alice's political relevance into the spotlight. Despite efforts, Ruth lost in a Democratic landslide fueled by the Depression. Borah comforted Alice, praising Ruth and sending policy drafts, while Nick's speakership ended in song and sorrow, his colleagues serenading him as he played the house piano. In declining health, Nick traveled to South Carolina to rest with his longtime mistress, Laura Curtis. He developed pneumonia and died on April 9, 1931, with Alice arriving too late to say goodbye. Washington mourned with black-draped offices and a memorial at the National Cathedral. Nick was buried in Cincinnati. Paulina did not attend. Privately, Alice mourned, and surprisingly, found kinship with Laura Curtis, two women bonded by shared love and loss. Pressed to run for Nick's seat, Alice refused, unwilling to campaign or exploit her widowhood. Her decision cost the GOP the seat and control of the House. Though the press claimed Nick left a vast fortune, his estate was modest. After debts and taxes, Alice and Paulina inherited far less than expected. A relative joked he spent as if he owned the mint. Back in Washington, Alice leaned on Nick's sister and her brother Ted for support. Lou Hoover also offered kindness. Outwardly composed, Alice grieved a man she respected more than loved. Her relationship with Paulina, sensitive and shy, grew strained. Alice's habit of finishing her daughter's sentences hinted at both protectiveness and control. The death of Aunt Bai further destabilized them, severing a crucial maternal tie. Yet Alice quickly resumed her role as Washington's most formidable hostess. She entertained political elites, kept up secret correspondence with Borah using their hello code, and remained a trusted power broker. Borah, still fiercely independent, retained his reputation as the Senate's conscience, respected for his principles, even when unpredictable. Alice, however, grew increasingly hostile toward cousin Franklin Roosevelt, blaming him for shattering the Roosevelt legacy. Her resentment extended to Eleanor, whom she held responsible for undermining her brother Ted's career. Despite her disdain for the New Deal, Alice served on the GOP Women's Advisory Board during the 1932 election, working with Lou Hoover and Dolly Gann to oppose FDR's rise. At the 1932 Democratic Convention, the party's platform reflected deep contradictions, calling for prohibition's repeal, federal aid, pensions, and lower tariffs, while simultaneously preaching fiscal restraint. FDR broke tradition by flying to Chicago and accepting the nomination in person, delivering his iconic New Deal speech as his son stood by his side. Though typically hesitant about public speaking, Alice campaigned vigorously for Hoover in 1932. Touring the Midwest with Lou Hoover, she delivered sharp, fiery speeches attacking the Democrats as dishonest and reckless. In Cincinnati, she overcame personal fear to deliver a national address, warning that Hoover's vetoes had saved the nation from bankruptcy. She also contributed an article to Ladies' Home Journal, adding her voice to the Republican cause. Edith Roosevelt, equally enraged by FDR's appropriation of the Roosevelt name, joined the campaign, speaking at Madison Square Garden and leading women's efforts in New York. Despite their efforts, the Depression doomed Hoover's re-election, and FDR won in a landslide. Alice later admitted her vote for Hoover was more about blocking Franklin in a nasty way than true support. As her political circle shrank, Ted resigned and Borah moved into the minority, Alice remained visible. She visited the White House to bid farewell to the Hoovers and, by Eleanor's invitation, attended FDR's inauguration, even dining with the Roosevelts that night, displaying grace despite their deep political rift. Though her formal influence faded, Alice remained socially and politically relevant. Her legendary dinners, filled with gourmet food and biting commentary, became salons of conservative resistance. Alongside Edith and Archie, Alice condemned the New Deal's scope. Edith dubbed them the Republican Roosevelts, while Archie preferred discussing hunting over politics. They viewed FDR's flurry of legislation as dangerous government overreach. In contrast, Eleanor Roosevelt embraced active public engagement. Her progressive circle, many women and some even queer, like Frances Perkins and Rose Schneiderman, became the heart of FDR's reform engine. Alice derided them as female impersonators, while FDR called them squaws. Her harshest barbs were saved for Eleanor. She mocked her voice, teeth, and earnestness in public impersonations so cutting that even Eleanor once requested to see it, only to be deeply wounded. Yet in private, the two exchanged warm notes of mutual praise. Alice's resentment of FDR was deeply personal. She had watched Nick, Borah, and her brother Ted fail to reach the presidency, while Franklin triumphed. She called his rise nemesis in the person of Franklin, revealing her bitterness at being politically sidelined in a world dominated by men. In 1933, she published Crowded Hours, a bestseller despite her dislike of writing. She also co-edited the Desk Drawer anthology with Ted and contributed to Ladies' Home Journal in 1934, praising women like Frances Perkins, but lamenting the slow progress for women in politics. Her jabs at Eleanor grew nastier, mocking her looks, intellect, and taste in art. Alice once posed with a Renoir purely to spite Eleanor's preference for Picasso. Most scandalously, she invited FDR and his longtime mistress, Lucy Mercer, to dinner, later quipping that he deserved a good time because he was married to Eleanor. Facing financial pressures and driven by political passion, Alice launched a syndicated column in 1935. The national scene, Capital Comment, and Alice in Blunderland were carried by the McNaught Syndicate. With acid wit, she attacked New Deal programs, mocked Roosevelt's economic policies, and commented on everything from the abdication crisis to the rise of fascism in Europe. The 1936 election invigorated Alice's writing. She predicted FDR's third-term ambitions, ridiculed Secretary Morgenthau's fiscal approach, and compared the New Deal to a privy purse funding presidential vanity. Her columns became required reading among conservatives. She didn't spare Republicans either, criticizing their weak leadership and even turning her pen on Borah, whose influence was fading. As a delegate at the 1936 GOP convention, Alice called for bold vision and a revival of Rooseveltian values, her father's, not Franklin's. While Eleanor's My Day offered daily empathy and soft focus commentary, Alice's columns were sharp, cynical, and brutally funny. Many preferred her candor. Idaho publisher Margaret Cobb Ailshee vowed to publish her regardless of content. By 1936, Alice was no longer just a social force. She was shaping political gossip and amplifying insider speculation. She floated bipartisan ticket rumors, pointed out Democratic fractures, and commented on backroom power plays. Even without holding office, Alice stayed at the center of Washington's conversation. Privately, her mockery of Eleanor turned crueler. She recited satirical poems ridiculing Eleanor's reformist zeal, curated a private archive of anti-Roosevelt verse, and shared cutting pieces like Rejected, in which even the devil refuses FDR entry to hell. Through barbed wit, Alice maintained her power, not by holding office, but by owning the last word. By the late 1930s, Alice's literary influence was fading. Critics found her writing lacked the bite of her legendary wit, and her memoir Crowded Hours was considered underwhelming. Eleanor Roosevelt coolly remarked that Alice sounded bitter, and public favor shifted toward Eleanor's more empathetic tone. When William Borah made a final run for the presidency in 1936, Alice did not support him. Their political alliance had cooled, though personal affection lingered. Borah's isolationism and refusal to court party factions doomed his campaign. At the GOP convention, Alice was overlooked for committee roles, a sign of her diminished clout. That summer, Roosevelt family members gathered to memorialize Quentin Roosevelt. FDR, Alice, Ted, and Archie attended, while Kermit's alcoholism loomed quietly in the background. Confident of a Republican win, Alice campaigned for Olaf Landon, even betting $100 on his victory. FDR's overwhelming 5-23-8 win stunned her. She paid up. Alexander Woollcott quipped he'd donate it to a poor, broken-down newspaperman. In January 1940, Borah died from a sudden brain hemorrhage at age 74. Paulina accompanied his body to Idaho, where his funeral discreetly honored his deep, decades-long bond with Alice. After his death, Alice threw herself into politics, backing Robert Taft over Dewey and denouncing FDR's third term as authoritarian. She decried military aid to Britain, warning it would drag the U.S. into war under the guise of neutrality. By 1940, Alice had joined a powerful cohort of isolationists: Charles Lindbergh, Herbert Hoover, Senator Burton Wheeler, and her brother Ted. They viewed intervention as political theater, designed to salvage FDR's waning domestic support. As war swept Europe, the America First Committee, AFC, formed, led by Yale students including Gerald Ford and Potter Stewart. Alice joined its board and Washington chapter, alongside Senator Taft and General Robert E. Wood. The AFC promoted strict neutrality, defending American democracy and economic liberty from entanglement abroad. Its ranks swelled to 850,000 members, attracting everyone from disillusioned New Dealers to young idealists, John F. Kennedy among them. But the AFC's reputation crumbled after Lindbergh's infamous 1941 speech blaming Jews for pushing America toward war. Alice helped draft the committee's defense, calling his views personal, not institutional, but the backlash was swift. Her brother Kermit, serving with the British Army, was horrified. Friends like Alexander Woollcott and Donald MacLean grew distant. Her glittering dinner parties turned into isolationist echo chambers. Columnist Joe Alsop joked it felt like dining with a mongoose in a nest full of cobras. Alice paid dearly for her position. While not openly hateful, her remarks about Jews and blood ties revealed the prejudices of her class. After Pearl Harbor, isolationists were publicly discredited. Alice withdrew from politics and began rehabilitating her image by supporting Chinese war orphans through Madame Chiang Kai-shek's charity. World War II brought unbearable losses to the Roosevelt family. Ted Roosevelt's son Quentin was gravely wounded in Tunisia. Archie, disabled from World War I, re-enlisted and briefly stayed with Alice before deploying. In 1943, Kermit committed suicide in Alaska, worn down by alcoholism, illness, and despair. Archie returned from New Guinea wounded and weak, now the sole surviving son of Theodore and Edith Roosevelt. Edith was left shattered. She made a rare public appearance after Ted's death, a quiet act of mourning. On September 30th, 1948, Edith Roosevelt died at Sagamore Hill. Her final years were clouded by sorrow, having outlived nearly all of her sons. By the 1940s, Alice's relationship with her daughter Paulina had grown strained. When 19-year-old Paulina became engaged to Alexander Sturm, Alice, still mourning her brother Ted, was wary of Sturm's drinking and emotional instability. Though cultured, Sturm clashed with Alice's expectations. Paulina, anxious and timid, had been raised in privilege but with little warmth, and likely saw marriage as an escape. Their emotional distance deepened. The wartime wedding was tasteful. Paulina wore Alice's pearls and a Romanoff veil. Days later, Alice lost her closest friend, Ruth McCormick Sims, to pancreatitis, a devastating blow. When FDR died in 1945, Alice sent Eleanor condolences. The response was polite, but their feud remained unresolved. The revelation that Roosevelt had died in the presence of his longtime mistress, Lucy Mercer, only reignited Alice's contempt. In 1946, Paulina gave birth to Joanna, making Alice a grandmother. Yet her joy was tempered by concern over Sturm's drinking and their fraught mother-daughter dynamic. She remained emotionally distant from Joanna's early years. Instead, she poured her energy into hosting elite salons, entertaining justices, diplomats, and writers. Her drawing room remained Washington's most sought-after forum for high-level debate. By the 1950s, Alice was a living legend, still sharp, still formidable. On her 64th birthday, she found eerie resonance in Ezra Pound's poem, The Return, identifying with its imagery of fading power. She later visited Pound at St. Elizabeth's Psychiatric Hospital, admiring his intellect despite his fascist politics. They bonded over literature and even planned an anthology. Alice supported his 1949 Bollingen Prize and likely helped secure his 1958 release. She viewed the Korean War as validation of her fears about Soviet expansion and blamed FDR's diplomacy. While she disliked McCarthy's theatrics, she championed Nixon as a serious anti-communist. During the 1952 primaries, she campaigned for Robert Taft, lamented his loss, and supported Eisenhower largely for Nixon's presence. She later claimed to have encouraged Nixon to accept the vice president role. Though critical of Eisenhower's blandness, Alice praised his 1953 State of the Union and celebrated when TR's portrait by John Singer Sargent was installed in the cabinet room. That year, Sagamore Hill was opened to the public as a national memorial, marking a symbolic return of Theodore Roosevelt's legacy to American life. Tragedy struck again in 1957 when Paulina, age 31, died from a mixture of alcohol, sleeping pills, and painkillers. Though many suspected suicide, Alice insisted it was accidental, citing Paulina's devotion to her daughter and recent religious conversion. Paulina had joined the Catholic worker movement after Sturm's alcohol-related death in 1951, further supporting Alice's belief in her daughter's resolve. Recovering from a mastectomy herself, Alice, then 74, honored Paulina's wishes and adopted Joanna. They built a strong bond, spending summers at Wyoming's Sunlight Ranch and finding healing through structure, nature, and affection. Back in D.C., Joanna thrived with Alice's guidance, riding lessons, social outings, and stability. By the 1960s, Alice remained close to both Nixon and the Kennedys. She admired Nixon's intellect and political instincts and supported him financially after his 1960 and 1962 losses. yet she was also captivated by the Kennedy charisma. She described Robert as a priest or a revolutionary and attended JFK's inauguration. As a guest at Hickory Hill salons, she found herself quietly impressed, appreciating the Kennedy brothers' intellect and anti-communist resolve. To her, their era briefly revived the glamour and substance she had once known. Her influence endured at high-profile events like the 1963 All-Sop Dinner for Lady Diana Cooper. Felix Frankfurter praised her razor-sharp tongue. NBC's Robert Kintner admired her enduring insight. She adored President Kennedy, attending major cultural events during his administration. His assassination devastated her. She kept photos of Robert Kennedy in her home until her own death. Alice retraced her famed 1905 Asia tour with her granddaughter Joanna, journalist Joan Braden, and biographer Christy Miller. Her memory of the journey dazzled companions, and in Japan, she showed off yoga-like flexibility she'd learned from her father. At 82, she stole the show at Truman Capote's 1966 black and white ball, wearing a dime store mask, while her home was burglarized. Thankfully, her locket containing TR's hair survived. Despite her elite background, Alice embraced parts of the counterculture. She defended civil rights, displayed a Black Power mask on her Statue of Liberty replica, and praised the Beatles. She befriended Portia Washington Pittman, admired Gloria Steinem, and joked that she was manufacturing LSD, earning her the nickname honorary homosexual. The youth and gay communities adored her. Still active on the social circuit, Alice dined with global dignitaries at Nixon's events. Though she found Watergate grimly amusing, she supported Nixon personally, even while mocking his frequent quoting of her father. She called moralistic critics boastful monkeys and remained a fixture at diplomatic galas, even after a second mastectomy in 1970, when she famously referred to herself as Washington's topless octogenarian. In her final decade, Alice focused on her granddaughter Joanna. They shared poetry, humor, and affection. Her DuPont Circle home, filled with books, reporters, politicians, and a Siamese cat named Darling Puss Cat, remained a center of conversation and charm. Though she lost interest in post-Nixon politics, she attended Queen Elizabeth II's bicentennial dinner in 1976, delighting royalty with tales of King Edward VII. At a White House event that same year, she was seen walking arm in arm with a retired black staffer from her father's administration, a silent farewell to the world she had shaped and outlived. Alice Roosevelt Longworth died peacefully at home on February 20, 1980, at the age of 96. Her granddaughter Joanna, friend Robert Hellman, and her cat were by her side. In her final moment, she stuck out her tongue. One last wink from a woman who had once called herself a cheerful fossil. Born in an election year and dying in another, Alice lived at the center of American political life. She was the firstborn and last surviving child of Theodore Roosevelt and the longest-lived presidential child in U.S. history. Once dismissed as an extra piece of baggage, she redefined the role of first daughter, rising from White House rebel to Washington queenmaker, shaping policy, society, and public opinion for over 7 decades. Though she stood apart from her cousins Franklin and Eleanor, Alice wielded her wit and legacy to become the Capitol's most irreverent insider. Fiercely independent and endlessly curious, she debated world leaders, mentored generations, and built a sphere of influence rooted in intellect and charisma, rather than official title. "I do only what pleases me," she once said, and so she did, from start to magnificent finish. As we reflect on Alice Roosevelt's extraordinary life, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Was she simply a rebellious spirit, or a woman shaped by the profound losses she endured? Did her rivalries with Helen Taft and Eleanor Roosevelt stem from political differences or from deeper struggles over power and identity? And what of her complex relationship with her beloved but somewhat absent father? How did it shape the person she became? When we consider the whispers of infidelity and the mystery surrounding her daughter's paternity, we see a private life marked by pain and loneliness. So tell me, how do you view this remarkable first daughter? I'd love to hear your perspective. So drop a comment down below and let's keep the conversation going. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more deep dives into history's most extraordinary figures. As always, thank you for watching. Until next time, keep seeking the stories that move your soul.